Hi, my name is Penny Booker, and this video will explain attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or what's more commonly known as ADHD. So the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for ADHD is a persistent pattern of inattention and/or hyperactivity and impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. And that's characterized by either inattention and/or the hyperactivity and impulsivity. So these symptoms have to persist for at least 6 months, and they have to be inconsistent with development, and they also have to negatively impact your social, your academic, or occupational activities. Now I'll define some key symptoms of ADHD. Inattention. It's a lack of ability to focus on the task at hand. We have to remember that it is not due to defiance or a lack of comprehension. So we need to be sure there's not an intellectual disability or another concern regarding comprehension and understanding. Likewise, outright defiant behavior, though it may warrant a clinical diagnosis, wouldn't fit the criteria for ADHD. Hyperactivity refers to excessive motor activity, such as a child running about, when it's not appropriate, or there could be excessive fidgeting, tapping, or talkativeness. In adults, you might see hyperactivity manifest as restlessness or wearing each other out or wearing others out with their activity. Impulsivity refers to hasty actions that occur in the moment without forethought, and then they have a high potential for harm to the individual. So running out into the street without looking. Impulsivity may reflect a desire for immediate rewards or an inability to delay gratification. So impulsive behaviors may manifest as social intrusiveness or making important decisions without considering long-term consequences. We might see that more for an adult, more so than a child. They tend to do that normally as children. Inattention. So these are the criteria listed in the DSM. You need to have 6 or more symptoms, or 5 or more for children and adults 17 and over. And again, the symptoms are not solely a manifestation of oppositional behavior, defiance, or hostility, or a failure or inability to understand tasks or instructions given. So the first is that the person often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes. They might overlook and miss details, their work is inaccurate, etc. B, they often have difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activities. So they might have difficulty remaining focused in lectures, conversations, or lengthy reading. I'm sure we've all been there. Often it doesn't seem that they are listening when they're spoken to directly, so their mind seems elsewhere, even if there doesn't seem to be any other distractions. D, often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace. So they may start tasks, but they quickly lose focus, and then they get easily sidetracked. E often has difficulty organizing tasks and activities. So they have difficulty managing sequential tasks, keeping materials and belongings in order. They may have messy or disorganized work, poor time management, and have trouble meeting deadlines. F often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort. So schoolwork or homework, for older adolescents or adults, it could be preparing reports, reviewing lengthy papers, long meetings. G often loses things necessary for tasks or activities. So they could lose school materials, books, pencils, pens, papers, things like that. Adults, maybe tools, a wallet, important paperwork, their glasses. H, they're often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. For adults or older adolescents, it could be unrelated thoughts. I, they're often forgetful in daily activities. So doing chores, running errands, returning calls, paying bills, keeping appointments for adults and older kids. Hyperactivity and impulsivity. Again, you would need six or more of the criteria to be met for children, five or more for older adolescents and adults 17 and over. And again, the symptoms are not a manifestation of oppositional behavior, defiance, hostility, etc. So A, they often fidget or taps hands or feet and squirms in their seat. Um, Obviously, that would look different for a child or an adult, but and again, you want to look at developmentally because children do move quite a bit more until they get into, adolescence or so. B, they might leave their seat in situations when remaining seated is expected. So they leave their place in the classroom, in the office, or other workplace, or in other situations that require remaining in place. Again, just keep in mind developmentally, young children are not made to sit for long periods of time. So just because a second grader is getting up out of their seat often does not mean that they necessarily have ADHD. C, run or climbs in situations where it's inappropriate. So in adolescents or adults, that might be feeling restless more so than climbing and running around. E, often on the go or acting as if driven by a motor. Um, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped D, unable to play quietly. Again, for an adult, that could be a leisure activity. They're unable to do that quietly. And then E, often on the go or is acting if they're driven by a motor. So they can't sit still for an extended period of time. Adults, you might see it in work meetings and restaurants. They may be experienced by others as being restless or difficult to keep up with. F, they talk excessively. G, they may blurt out an answer before a question has been completed. So they can't wait for their turn in conversations or even for people to complete their thought or their sentence. H, difficulty waiting their turn, so while waiting in line and similar situations. And I, interrupts or intrudes on others, so they could butt into the conversation, may use other people's things without asking. For adolescents and adults, they might intrude or try to take over what other people are doing. So diagnosing ADHD, several symptoms need to have been present before age 12. Again, as I've stated previously, you need to make sure that you're keeping developmental norms in mind because children often show signs of what we know as ADHD, but it's typical childhood behavior. So it needs to be excessive and out of the norm. It is important to have informants, so other people that can attest to the person's behavior. You can't rely, especially as if your client is an adult, you can't rely solely on their memories of childhood experiences or symptoms because they could inflate it or underreport, and it may not give a true diagnosis. Also, the symptoms need to be present in more than one setting. So if a child or an adult is only having concerns at school and nowhere else, they would not meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, and it could potentially be another issue. It also has to interfere with normal functioning. So, normal can be quite a spectrum. It has to be out and really considerably out of the norm to affect functioning for it to be considered ADHD. And then it can occur exclusively during course of another disorder or drug or alcohol use or withdrawal. So similar to a lot of other diagnoses, if it's only happening during, drug or alcohol use or because of another disorder, you would not give the ADHD diagnosis. So again, it's difficult to diagnose young children, those that are under 5, because of their developmentally normal excessive activity and other behaviors, such as fidgeting, getting up out of their seat, especially when we're putting them into schools and daycares that are asking them to sit for very long periods of time. So that can be very difficult for them. You may also see mild speech, motor, or social delays co-occurring with ADHD, but they are not a symptom of ADHD. And you often recognize the symptoms in elementary age children. So once they've grown out of the young child phase and their behaviors are a little bit more manageable, when you notice these behaviors continuing is when parents or teachers may think, oh, maybe this kid has ADHD. So preschool age children and early elementary have trouble with hyperactivity, while older children and adolescents tend to have difficulty with inattention. During early adolescence, the ADHD may remain stable, and then older adolescents and adults might really find themselves restless and struggling with impulsivity and poor planning. So these specifiers, they have to have been met for the past 6 months. It could be combined presentation, where you have both inattentiveness and hyperactivity and impulsivity. You could have a predominantly inattentive presentation or a predominantly hyperactive and impulsive presentation. It could be in partial remission, and then it can be mild, moderate, or severe. So mild would be if any the symptoms or excess of those required to make a diagnosis are present, and then they result in no more than minor impairments. Moderate, the functional impairment would be between mild and severe, and then of course severe is that many symptoms in excess of those required to make the diagnosis, or they have several symptoms that are very severe, and they cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning. You want to rule these out. As you can see, there are many listed here. You would want to verify that the client does not have any of these disorders before giving an ADHD diagnosis. So something like ODD, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, bipolar disorder, and the like. This is a video of an interview done with a gentleman who was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD when he was 43 years old. It's a great video. He keeps it very positive, but he gives a lot of insight into what the adult may be feeling on the inside, although it's not recognizable necessarily outwardly to others. It gives a lot more insight rather than just the DSM criteria as to what ADHD really is, what it feels like, what it looks like to someone who has been diagnosed with it. So I encourage you to watch it. It's pretty short and it's really informative. Thank you for watching my video. Have a great day.